I'm not who you think I am. I'm not who I think I am. I am who I think you think I am. Complicated, I know, but bear with me. Basically, our self-identity is shaped not by how we see ourselves, nor how others see us, but by how we think they see us. This is why a simple compliment can change your whole mood. It's why criticism, especially from someone you care about, can hurt so deeply. Because every word and every look is another brushstroke on the canvas of who you think you are. Think about it. You're not just yourself. You're countless versions of it. Every single person who ever knew you has a version of you that exists only in their mind, and none of them are the same. To your friends, you might be the funny one, the quiet one, and the serious one all at once, depending on who you're with. To your parents, you still are the same kid who needs protecting, and to a stranger who just saw you at the store, you're nothing but a passing blur. We often don't realize just how different these versions of ourselves are, until we're stuck in a room with two people who know us in completely different ways. It's a strange feeling when you're not sure which you to be, and all of a sudden you're hyper-aware of every word and every gesture, until you end up feeling off, like an actor who's forgotten their lines. That's because your sense of self is being pulled in two different directions. You try to balance it, but you can't. Not perfectly, because you're trying to match what you think they think of you, and that's exhausting. Psychologist Charles Cooley called this the looking glass self, because in essence you're looking at yourself through the reflections of everyone else's perception of you. It's like living in a funhouse of mirrors, and each one shows you a slightly different version of who you are, but none of them are quite right. Some are flattering, some are warped, and some barely resemble you at all. The people around you are holding up these mirrors, and you're constantly shifting, adjusting, trying to fit into each one. And so, we create masks, social masks. You wear one at work, at home, with friends, with strangers. It's not pretending, it's survival. Carl Jung called this the persona, the face we present to the world, our attempt to keep up. But while it helps us fit in, it can also trap us, because sometimes we get so used to wearing a mask that we forget who's underneath. You laugh at jokes you don't find funny. You nod along when you don't really care, and it's only later you wonder, was that really me? But even when you're alone and you don't need a mask anymore, who are you? Alan Watts says, trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth, because hate or love it, you're not fully you with nobody around to reflect off of. The person in your head is probably not the same out loud. Even your voice literally isn't the same to you as it is to others. That's why it almost disappoints us hearing it from a phone or a recorder. In fact, not liking the sound of your own voice is so common that there's a term for it: voice confrontation. And it's because in your head, you hear your voice through vibrations in your skull, which makes it sound deeper and richer. What everyone else hears is, well, different. It's kind of like looking in a mirror. You probably like your mirror reflection more than photos of yourself, and there's a reason for that. You're used to seeing a reversed version of you, the face you've seen 1,000 times brushing your teeth or fixing your hair. It's called the mere exposure effect. Basically, the more familiar something is, the more we tend to like it. So, the you know best. It's just the version you've gotten used to, but it's not the same version everyone else sees, and it's definitely not the only one that exists. Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man." You're always in flux, in motion. The you that existed at the beginning of this video is not quite the same as the you watching this now, and won't be at the end of it. Every little thing shapes you, just a tiny bit. Everything is always changing ever so slightly, maybe too little for you to notice, but it's still happening. And yet, we crave consistency. We want to be a solid, defined character in our own story, but we're more like a sketch that's constantly being erased and redrawn. The pencil never quite lifts from the page. It's why looking back at old photos or reading an old text feels so strange. You cringe, not because your past self was wrong, but because they're practically a stranger. That person made choices you wouldn't make today, said things you wouldn't say, believed things you might not believe anymore. In a way, they're gone, and yet still a part of you. Psychologists call this the end of history illusion. Studies from Harvard and the University of Virginia found that while we recognize how much we've changed in the past, we tend to underestimate how much we'll change in the future. It's like we always believe that the current version of ourselves is the final version, as if we've finally figured it all out. Spoiler alert, we haven't. We never do. And that's okay, because it makes life even more interesting. The ability to evolve constantly is what does. But this ever-changing notion makes the version of you that exists in someone else's mind, by definition, outdated. When someone thinks of you, they're not imagining the person you are right now. They're recalling the last version of you they saw, or the version that left the strongest impression. Could be you from last week, last year, or even from childhood. They don't see the tiny shifts in your perspective, the lessons you've learned, or the subtle changes in your personality. They didn't feel that quiet moment you had at 2 a.m, staring at the ceiling, when something just clicked. And it's not because they don't care, it's just human nature. We're all wrapped up in our own stories, our own endless evolution. While you're busy changing, so is everyone else. This is why running into an old friend feels so strange. They might still expect you to laugh at the same jokes or care about the same things, but maybe you've outgrown that version of yourself. And so, you find yourself slipping back into old patterns, playing the part they expect, because it's easier than trying to explain who you've become. But this isn't a one-way street. You do the same to others. You think you know who your friends are, who your parents are, who your co-workers are, but those are just versions of them that you've frozen in time. You're not fully aware of their growth, their struggles, their late-night epiphanies. In a way, every relationship we have is like talking to a ghost of who someone used to be, mixed with who we think they are. Because the human brain hates gaps, it loves a complete picture, even if it has to make things up to fill in the blanks. When you meet someone for the first time, your mind doesn't just stop at what they say or how they look. It fills in the rest with assumptions, stereotypes, and experiences from your past. Maybe they remind you of someone else, or perhaps their tone triggers a memory. Without realizing it, you build an entire backstory for them, layering your own biases and expectations over who they actually are. And they're doing the same to you. When you meet a person, you think you know them, but you don't. They exist in your mind as an idea, not as a reality. Psychologists call this impression formation. We take tiny pieces of information, a smile, a phrase, an outfit, and construct a whole narrative around it. Our brains are essentially storytellers, filling in the unknowns with whatever makes the story make sense. But those stories aren't always accurate. Yet once that first impression is set, our brains become stubborn. It takes a lot more evidence to change a first impression than to reinforce it. It's why a bad first impression can haunt you, and a good one can create unrealistic expectations. Ironically, your brain often tries to match every impression. It's a survival instinct to fit in. This is called the Pygmalion effect, where higher expectations lead to improved performance, and lower expectations do the opposite. If someone expects you to be funny, you might find yourself cracking jokes. If they see you as shy, you might hold back, even if that's not who you usually are. You could be sitting alone at a cafe. One person might think, they're so peaceful. Another might think, they look so lonely. The truth could be neither, or both, but each observer walks away with a different version of you in their mind. But nobody's story is complete. Everyone is working with half-written scripts and missing chapters, and so every interaction is like two incomplete puzzles trying to fit together, with pieces that don't quite match. And when those gaps are too big, when the story in your head doesn't match the story in theirs, they say, you've changed. But really, they just haven't updated their version of you in a while. In the end, we're all just walking each other home. We're all walking around as puzzles with pieces only partially visible to others. You'll never fully understand how someone else sees you, just as they'll never fully understand the layers of who you are. But instead of fearing that, maybe we can find comfort in it. It's what makes connection so powerful when it happens, and why a true understanding from someone else feels so rare and beautiful. But it's also why social interactions can be so draining. It's not just about being present, it's about managing the infinite possibilities of how you're being perceived. It's why you might replay conversations in your head, wondering, did I sound weird? Did they think I was awkward? But hey, maybe that's why the smartest people to ever live often shun social life.